concern the identifying of rhetorical strategies. That is, the modes or techniques that a writer often uses in order to present ideas or organize the evidence to the reader in a manner that is convincing. Strategies are usually a collection of devices and or appeals that a writer will use in order to target specific information to its audience. So you may not find a strategy in a sentence. You are more likely to find a strategy in a collection of sentences, or rather, a paragraph or a collection of paragraphs. Strategies are more encompassing, while devices are more specific and localized. Now, other videos will talk about devices. This one primarily is about strategies. Now, there are many different strategies that a writer can use, and by no means is this list supposed to be comprehensive. But these are some of the more common ones. So, the first one is a cause and effect. The cause and effect, the idea is that the writer will establish a link between what happened and what will happen. So, the idea here is if you give the reader an idea of what is the start of something, then you can anticipate what will be the end of something. Why would this strategy be useful, a cause and effect? Well, it allows the writer to make arguments that otherwise would not be able to be because they're primarily theoretical. So, for instance, take this example from the 2011 prompt from the College Board, Florence Kelly. So, if the mothers and the teachers in Georgia could vote, and here begins the idea. Will the Georgia legislature have refused at every session for the last 3 years to stop the work in the mills of children? Stop the work, right? So the connection here is, if we could vote, there would be no child labor. And while she's not making the point in that direct of a way, she is creating a cause and effect. The idea here is, though presented as rhetorical questions, right, which is in itself a device, in this case, the rhetorical question and the repetition of the idea paralleled all the way through. If we could vote, would we not be able to, right? So these are devices, the rhetorical questions and the repetition that parallel itself throughout the passage. But the overall strategy would be a kind of cause and effect. You may also call it a problem solution. It's not, the two may be interchangeable here, but the point still stands, which is, in this paragraph, the writer is creating a strategy, right, wherein she is creating precedent for the idea that if the mothers could vote, then child labor would stop. So this is an example of a cause and effect. Here's another one. This is from the 2012 John F. Kennedy. All right, it almost works in the same fashion with the if, right? But look at the way he organizes. He creates a domino effect, if you will, of all the ways in which goods in America would increase in price because of the increase of the steel companies. So if this rise in the cost of steel is imitated by the rest of the industry instead of rescinded, it would increase the cost of homes, autos, appliances, and most other items for our American family. It would increase the cost of machinery and tools to every American businessman and farmer. It would seriously handicap our efforts to prevent the inflationary spiral from eating up the pensions of older citizens, so on and so forth. Now, we could note, right, that this is an anaphora. It would, it would, it would, so on. Now, these are examples of devices, but what we're looking at here is the overall strategy. And the strategy here, overall, again, it could be a cause and effect or interchangeable with a problem solution. The point is, you have to identify the overall strategy. And the way to identify the overall strategy is to say, what is this paragraph, or what are these paragraphs together accomplishing? What are they doing to the rest of the text, right? Just like a word may impact the meaning of a sentence, in a sentence, a paragraph, a collection of paragraphs will impact the meaning of an entire text. So that's what we want to do. We want to look at how the paragraphs are working together to create a specific, an organization of meaning, right? A specific meaning. All right, so let's go to the next one. This is comparing and contrasting. Here, the writer looks to make similarities or to establish similarities and differences between things. So, when looking at compare and contrast, you might want to look at the significance of these comparisons or contrasts, because at times they will be significant. So, back to Florence Kelly, 2011. Tonight, while we sleep, and note right away, this will be the beginning of an anaphora. Tonight, while we sleep, several thousand little girls will be working in textile mills all night through, and the deafening noise of the spindles and looms and spinning and weaving cotton and wool and silks and ribbons for us to buy. And then there is another repetition in Alabama, then in Georgia, right? The law provides that a child under 16 years of age shall not work in a cotton mill at night longer than 8 hours, and Alabama does better in this respect than any other southern state. Now, the comparison here is she is comparing the fact that while we are sleeping, little girls are working, right? That's the comparison here. Now, what does this comparison create? Why does it work? Well, to look at this strategy as a whole, we would have to also look at its own devices. So yes, there is the repetition, right? And yes, this idea is paralleled all the way through. These things are true. But by repeating and by paralleling, right, and using the writer is appealing to the reader through pathos, right? So what we're looking at here is a comparison and contrast that is primarily targeting the audience through pathos by repeating the phrase that our negligence, right, is allowing child labor. And then she is repeating the idea over and over again. These ideas are further repeated by calling out different states. Why? Because she is creating the precedent for other people are doing it. Many people are allowing it everywhere. And so then while we sleep becomes not only a literal phrase, like as while we are sleeping, but rather it becomes a figurative phrase, wherein while we are negligent, while we continue to ignore or turn the blind eye to the issue, so on. So this is how a comparison and contrast strategy would work, right? And the key here you have to remember isn't about the naming. It's almost not as important what you call the strategy as it is if you're able to identify what it's doing and what its working parts are. So you've got defining, or a strategy of definition. So defining is when the writer tells the reader what something means, and also what it does not mean, right? And what something is and what it is not. This is important. If you define an argument, you control the argument. If you control the argument, you win the argument. So, as a strategy, the definition makes sure that the readers understand what is meant by a key term, right? Sometimes they can redefine the meaning of a term so as to bring out a new meaning altogether, right? Or to create a new connotation to the meaning. So, let me look at this example. This is a 2008 America Needs Its Nerds. So this is right at the beginning. Now, there's something very wrong with the system of values in a society that only has derogatory terms like nerd and geek for the intellectually curious and academically serious. So they're already establishing the idea here, right? That we are using derogatory terms for, or derogatory definitions for terms for people who are, well, intellectually curious and academically serious. So then A geek, according to the dictionary, goes right into it, shocks the public by biting off the heads of live chickens. So they give you right a definition right away, right? But the idea here is to change that definition as the text continues. So, for instance, it is a telling fact that our language and our culture that it is a telling fact about our language and our culture that someone dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge is compared to a freak biting the head off a live chicken. So right away, this is one of the points we're trying to make. The point is not that a geek is such an alarming word. The point is that we would use that word to criticize people who are smarter, right? And I think the implication is that the implication of the writer anyway, that we do not value intelligence, or somehow we ostracize, there we go, intelligence. So anyway, they go into the example. There's another one here from 2011, Samuel Johnson. So in this letter, he is rejecting a woman who asked for well, it wasn't really a recommendation, but it's mostly patronage for her son. So, madam, I hope, pay attention to the hope, because this will be a recurrent theme. So, this may also be a strategy, by the way. Creating a motif may also be a strategy. I hope you will believe that my delay in answering your letter could proceed only from my unwillingness to destroy any hope that you had formed. Hope is itself a species of happiness. Here's the definition, right? And perhaps the chief happiness which the world affords. But like all other pleasures immoderately enjoy, the excess of hope must be expiated by pain, and expectations improperly indulged must end in disappointment. So it's good to hope, but you should not hope against reason. If it be asked, what is the improper expectation which it is dangerous to indulge, experience will quickly answer that it is such expectation as it is dictated not by reason but by desire. Expectation raised not by the common occurrences of life but by the wants of the expectant. An expectation that requires the common course of things to be changed. So, you want too much. That's the implication here. So, he is using this as a way of letting her down easy. Look, I hope that you know that it took me a while to answer because I didn't want to destroy any hope that you had formed, right? That's what he's saying. Because hope is important to have, but too much hope is bad, right? And what is too much hope, you say? Well, that's when you are wanting things that would require the common course of things to be changed altogether, to all the rules to be broken. Your hope is unreasonable. So he has to help her redefine her expectations, right? In many ways, he's being gentle and teaching her what the right way to go about it is. So this is another one. So this one is more subtle, right? So this one begins with how we already think of the issue to then change the issue. So certainty creates strength. Certainty gives one something upon which to lean. Uncertainty creates weakness. Uncertainty makes one tentative, if not fearful. And tentative steps, even when the right direction may not overcome significant obstacles. To be a scientist requires not only intelligence and curiosity, but passion, patience, creativity, self-sufficiency, and courage. It is not the courage to venture into the unknown, it is the courage to accept, indeed embrace uncertainty. And there it is. So certainty, good. Uncertainty, bad. But to be a scientist is to have the courage to embrace uncertainty. Right? So he begins with a standard definition of what we already expected, right? To then redefine uncertainty as something that is good, not something that is bad. All right. So this strategy, for instance, the strategy has a parallel structure: certainty, certainty, uncertainty, uncertainty, right? It's parallel structure. Then it has this, you would call this an allusion. This is an allusion to Claude Bernard, right? And then there's a quote. What else does it have? Well, you can say that this is subverting the original definition, right? So there are some devices already at work here. That's how strategies work. They need devices, right? But the strategy is the overall approach, the effect created overall. All right, the next one is describing. So Describing is when the writer describes something or shows a person, a place, or a thing, maybe the way it feels or the way it smells, right? Why is describing important? Because it's about, well, creating images primarily, but it's also about putting something in the reader's head, making sure that the reader sees it. So this one would primarily be a pathos oriented strategy, right? Because it would appeal to the audience through pathos. So, take the 2008, the Great Influenza, this passage, which is the same one actually that we were just covering, and let's look at what it's doing. Now, all real scientists exist on the frontier. Even the least ambitious among them deal with the unknown, if only one step beyond the known. The best among them move deep into the wilderness. Now, here you could say that he is creating a metaphor between what we don't know in terms of science and then comparing it to the wilderness, right? And he does it again when he says that every step takes us further into the wilderness, right? He's comparing the idea of going, of trying to find a solution in a scientific way, or rather comparing the scientific method to exploring the wild or exploring the unknown. But as we continue reading, you'll notice that this describes things in such a way that the reader can make that comparison very easily. So the best among them moved deep into the wilderness region where they know almost nothing, where the very tools and techniques needed to clear the wilderness in order to bring order to it do not exist. There they probe in a disciplined way. There a single step can take them through the looking glass into a world that seems entirely different, and if they are at least partly correct, their probing acts like a crystal to precipitate an order out of chaos, to create form, structure, and direction. A single step can also take one off a cliff. In the wilderness, a scientist must create everything. It is grunt work, tedious work that begins with figuring out what tools one needs and then making them, so on and so forth. A shovel, dig up dirt. Then there is dynamite or not dynamite. Then how to go through the rock and all that. Anyway, so this entire thing, you can say that this is a metaphor. It's definitely a metaphor. It's creating a comparison between people that go into the wilderness, right, and the scientists who are trying to find an answer to something. So that's the connection being made here. Are there other devices in here? Most certainly. There are plenty of devices that are working through here. I suppose that you could say that let me see. I think the metaphor is the most overwhelming device altogether. But I think the internal questions, the internal thinking is probably something that is like a device. I think primarily here what is happening is this very sentence has created the connection that we were looking for, wherein science exists on the frontier, right? I mean, take for instance this looking glass here, right? It may very well be like Alice in Wonderland, through the looking glass, but it may also be, instead of that, a magnifying glass or something that a scientist would use to find information, or rather not to find information, but to view things more closely, right? But either way, the very idea is that we use tools to go into another world, or in this case, a world of not knowing, a world of uncertainty. So the implication of this section here is that descriptions can help a writer convey a message, but it can also help a writer capture the imagination of the reader. That's the implication here. All right. So explaining a process. This one might actually be very common and very useful too. The idea of explaining a process is that you say how something is done. Now, it doesn't have to be how something everyday, that is everyday things, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily that. It's got to be, it's mostly what you'll find is how how something was done in the past, perhaps. So this is one example here, or how the a thing is how the process of a thing. Now, this is especially useful in argumentative texts. So that means that the text you are reading, of course, when you're writing for the AP Lang um, rhetorical text, what you're reading is not a rhetorical text. What you're reading is an argumentative text for the most part. So then what you're doing is you're identifying the argument of that text and saying, okay, these are the strategies they're using, right? So we're identifying the rhetorical strategies. The thing itself is an argumentative text. So explaining a process in an argumentative text may help a writer prove his arguments. Furthermore, take for instance the 2004 nude statutes. So this one is about the banning or the censorship of nude statues, or one specific one that arrived to that region and is published in the Atlantic Monthly. The idea here is that if we put books away in libraries, books that are censored, and we put them on the top shelf, let's say, why can we do that with nude statues, or rather with art that we think is too problematic? Why can we just, I don't know, put it in a separate room, right? Now, sometimes when explaining the way something works, you are able to prove your argument even further. Let's look at it here. Every librarian knows what books to reserve for the exclusive use of persons of mature age, and every curator of a museum is likewise bound to admit that its public must be considered. The general principle is entirely clear. There is no great difficulty in carrying out the details. The analogy between public libraries and public museums helps us decide as to special points. It's funny that he calls out his own device, right? The analogy between the two. If a certain book offends any considerable number of persons, it should be placed on the reserve list, even though a considerable number of other persons may find no harm in it. No librarian would seek to enforce his private judgment in such a matter against the protests of a large group. Hey, what's up, baby?
And you need that?
Yes, I need that.
Oh.
Okay, let me continue, okay?
Why?
Because I'm teaching.
Oh, that?
Yeah.
Too? How about you not?
Go play, baby, go play.
Come here.
No librarian would seek to enforce his private judgment in such a matter against the protest of a large group of respectable persons of a different opinion. The same procedure should be followed in arranging the statues in a museum open to the general public. All right, so the implication is this. If A, then B, right? If libraries put away books that people don't like, then why can we do the same thing in a museum, right? Now, explaining the process of how they do it in a library so that then we can do the same in the museum, that is in itself a strategy. Because that process, for instance, if somebody were to tell you, let's say in this argument, we should put nude statues, or rather art that we deem offensive, in a private room, then we would say, well, that's not feasible, or I don't know that that would work, yada yada. But if I say, well, there's already a precedent for this. I mean, the museums, libraries already do this with their books. So if they already do it with their books, then why can't the same be done in a museum? So since there's already established a line of reasoning of how to do it, right, and it already works somewhere else, then the idea is that it would work here as well, right? All right, here's another one, narrating. And I think we're getting to the end here. Yeah, we're getting to the end. Narrating. Now, the strategy of narrating is fundamental because this is when the writer tells a story. And the story illustrates an argument, illustrates a point, offers evidence, counter evidence. Sometimes a story can be its own argument. So, narrating is probably one of the most common and one of the most useful because they relate to the audience personally. So, look at this example from the 2013 Last Child in the Woods. True, our experience of natural landscape often occurs within an automobile looking out, as Elaine Brooks said, but even that visual connection is optional. A friend of mine was shopping for a new luxury car to celebrate her half-century of survival in the material world. She settled on a Mercedes SUV with a GPS. Just tap in your destination, and the vehicle not only provides the map and the dashboard screen, but takes you there, talks you there. But she knew where to draw the line. The salesman's jaw dropped when I said I didn't want the backseat monitor for my daughter. She told me. He almost refused to let me leave the dealership until he could understand why. Rear seat and in-dash multimedia entertainment products, as they are, as they're called, are quickly becoming the hottest add-on since rear-view mirror fuzzy dice. The target market, parents who will pay a premium for a little backseat piece. Sales are brisk, and the prices are falling. Some systems include wireless, infrared, yada yada yada. Children can watch, so on and so forth. And then the end of that is, why do so many Americans say that they want their children to watch less TV, yet they continue to expand the opportunities for them to watch it? More important, why do so many people no longer consider the world worth watching? And this here is the big point being made. But that point is almost carried out by the story, right? My friend told me that she was buying a car and then told the person there, the seller, the salesman, that she did not want a TV in the back. And he was shocked, right? His jaw dropped. He was shocked. How could you not want a TV? What are you gonna do with the kids? Are you gonna talk to them? That's crazy. So that's the implication here, right? The telling of the story is itself what makes the point. I presume a reader would read this and feel a connection, as in, yeah, I've been experiences where I've decided not to opt out of technology, and people have looked at me like that's crazy, but that's the future. Why are you in the past, right? But then the point is made almost effortlessly at the end. Why? Because the point was already made by the story. Okay, so um, looking over the document as a whole, I want to make a few points clear. Number one, these are some examples of the many strategies that you would find. Number two, every strategy encompasses devices, and it's important to identify them. Number three, the strategies not only encompass devices, but they also include appeals. Everything has to appeal to the reader. Everything is filtered through an appeal. So you'll never find devices without appeals. Also, since, well, we're doing this remotely, and it's rather strange and we're getting used to it, we'll play the homework by ear, and I'll create a channel on our Discord so we can have a conversation about this later. But I want you to think about the homework, right? I want you to find strategies on the College Board website. I'll show you now. And here are some that I've listed. There's many, many more. And I think the more ingenious you can be, the better that will be. So let me go to the website so I can show you. So you go to the website, I have 7%. I'm good. So you go to the website and you open up 2016, let's say. And you open up the exam, then you go all the way to the bottom. Okay, so this one, let's say this is Margaret Thatcher, which we did before already. Here, this is a eulogy for Ronald Reagan. So ideally what I want you to do is go through the text and then find me an example of a strategy. Maybe one of the ones that we already talked about, maybe one of the ones, maybe another one. So I go here, let's say, if I remember correctly, let's say, well, here's a strategy of definition. She is defining Ronald Reagan's disposition as jolly and humorous and, well, pleasant, but that she's using this definition to go beyond it, right? Like that was a kind of strength for him. So that's a strategy of definition. Let's see. Well, I think the point is well made. So I'd like for you to find some of these, and then we'll reconvene at a later time. So I think that video is done. All right.